All right, so we've brought ourselves to the present, and we've got some context for natural resource management, especially with public agencies involved. Um, there has been a move coming out of conservation biology and ecology, these branches of the sciences, that we're really not managing things in the way that they should be, on the scales that we should be thinking of them, using the right metrics. We're not really capturing it. We're thinking in terms of timber harvest or oil and gas extraction, or even air and water quality or particular species. So some of these things, I mean, we've got a Clean Air Act focused on air. We've got a Clean Water Act focusing on water. We've got the Endangered Species Act focusing on species. And so our laws have been crafted in a way that they force us to focus on certain things, often at the expense of other things, and sometimes also at the expense of kind of a broader picture. And so that's this current and future perspective coming out of certain branches of the natural sciences, is that we really need to be thinking on ecosystem scales. We need to be thinking about how all these things are connected. You can't address air without changing things in the water and the soil. You can't talk about one species without factoring in all of the ecosystem that supports that habitat, right? So this move toward ecosystem management as a way to manage natural resources has been a big move in thinking coming out of the sciences and working its way into public agencies, because again they've gotten quite professional and scientific in the way that they try to make decisions. And so, these things from the sciences do filter their way in, even if it happens kind of slow, takes some time. But so that's kind of where we're at now, is that a lot of the scientists within these agencies want us thinking more about ecosystems, thinking about how everything's connected, not just thinking about timber as a distinct decision, not thinking about just habitat for one, tortoise that lives in these ponds in Mississippi and perhaps Louisiana. We need to be thinking about this whole longleaf pine ecosystem that used to be over a wide expanse of that part of the country, but now is much more isolated pockets. So in that context, we see more and more changes with human-driven changes. And so the biggest being climate change, anthropogenic, which just means human-centered, human-caused changes. And so, we see it probably most drastically in marine environments and in Arctic environments. Climate change is having big effects on snow cover, on water currents, on ocean acidification. So we're seeing things like coral bleaching. We're seeing permafrost that is thawing in areas that we wouldn't expect it to. We're seeing glaciers they're shrinking faster than we otherwise would expect them to, and climate change is driving a lot of these changes. Closer to home, I mean, we see things here too, and we're seeing invasive species killing trees in ways that are more drastic and rapid than we would expect. Wildfires, hurricanes becoming more common and more intense. Coastal flooding becoming a more frequent event as the ocean gets a little bit higher, but also storms get more intense, which is when we tend to get the worst flooding events. So all of this is affecting pretty much everywhere on Earth, is feeling these human-caused changes in different ways. And you can disagree with me on how important human aspects of climate change are. Um, I'm solidly in the corner of the scientists who specialize in studying this stuff. Um, you know, we'll be looking at the IPCC report coming out of the UN. It's a consensus-based document made by hundreds of scientists. So of course you can find dissenting voices. I'm not arguing that's not possible, but I am on the working assumption that this is not a grand conspiracy. This is something that is happening. We expect it to happen in much more drastic ways in the future, but more and more we are seeing it now. And that's a huge difference between when I was a college student. It wasn't that many years ago, but then we were talking about climate change as something that we needed to do stuff to avoid. And now the discussion about climate change is about mitigation and adaptation. How do we slow it, make it less serious? How do we mitigate it? It's happening. It's already happening. We know it's happening. We can't stop it or make it go away. We can make it less severe. The other thing we can do is we can adapt to it. We can make the consequences of it less harmful to people or to other things. Again, we'll focus on people because that's what we can most easily measure, but turns out people care about other things too. So we can scoop in a whole lot of things even if we filter it through that. So with all of this, with this ecosystem management, when it comes to natural resource management, and then this context of climate change and other human-caused changes happening to a lot of environments, we end up with the document that I've asked you to look at about the RAD decision-making coming out of the Park Service. So RAD, resist, accept, direct. National Park Service is saying basically, okay, historically, we tried to, again, this is coming out of an agency that is all about conservation, pristine conditions sort of ideas. And so the idea was originally, if you go back to Teddy Roosevelt and such, we could keep some areas without having humans bespoiled them, right? And they could be in their pristine natural condition and future generations could enjoy them as such. We've learned that just stepping back from stuff doesn't actually lead to the outcomes we may want. It's more complicated than that. We can suppress fires because fires are bad, but then we get this buildup of brush and litter that leads to really severe fires when there is one that comes through. So actually, just stepping back or trying to prevent fires, which seems like a good thing, can lead to bad situations, bad outcomes. We actually need to be more active in managing, either do controlled burns or actively thin out stuff in the forest if we want to prevent these really high intensity forest fires in parts of the country. It requires an active sort of management, even to make it look like we want it to, like it maybe historically did. And so stepping back hands off doesn't always get us what we want. We need to be more active in managing our resources very often, and the National Parks has recognized that. But so now, with all of these pressures coming from anthropogenic sources, that's where this RAD decision making. Do we resist those changes? So that's the historic practice of the National Park Service. If there are pressures on the environment, the ecosystem that a national park is protecting, let's try to prevent those changes from happening. Let's resist it. So, more people moving into South Central Kentucky puts more pressure on the waterways that are interconnected with the Mammoth Cave system. We may decide that we want to do everything we can to resist changes occurring from that. We may prohibit certain sort of development along the Green River in certain stretches. We may, work as hard as we can to prevent certain invasive species from coming in, et cetera, et cetera. So that would be a resisting change sort of strategy. Accepting change is saying, hey, stuff's going to happen, and let's keep an eye on it. Maybe we can't do much. Maybe we don't have the resources. Maybe we strategically don't want to. But so accepting is what it sounds like, letting it do its thing. Directing is saying, okay, there's change happening. Let's actively direct it in the way we want to go. And so, maybe we see changes in species and diseases that are killing trees, and we might want to actively plant trees in areas they may traditionally not have been, or at least predominant species, in ways that make our forests more robust to these to these invasive species and diseases that are coming through. Maybe we want to actively manage things at high elevation in a different way because snowpack is going to look different going forward than it did historically. Maybe the way we manage the Colorado River is going to look different because its source in snowpack in the Rockies looks different now than it used to. So again, kind of taking as given that things are changing. How do we respond to it? We either resist that change, we accept it, or we try to direct it in ways that we expect to be the best sort of response we could give, given that things are changing. So this is I think a nice document for kind of wrapping our heads around. It's a complicated world we live in when we're talking about natural resource management. Historically, the details were always hard, but the big idea was easy. That was a no-brainer. That was, let's get stuff the way it was. Let's keep it the way it was. Let's preserve things in this pristine condition that we found it in, that we stepped into the position of. Now, it's more complicated than that because, we can try, and that's the resist option, right? We can resist change as much as possible. But, if you're protecting the Great Barrier Reef and you're talking about ocean acidification, you're talking about a whole lot of liming to decrease the amount of acidification that's happening in all those waters. If that's what you're going to try to do, that's a big undertaking, and it might be the right one to do if you're managing that resource in that time. But it's a big deal, and so just knowing what the target is used to be a default of whatever the historic condition was. That's what we wanted to keep things as, and now we need to think a little bit more of what our actual target is. Do we use that historic one? That's the resist option. Do we set a new one? That's the direct one. Or do we just kind of go without a target and let it go its own way? And that's the accept option. So on Monday, we're going to be doing an in-class exercise together. I'm going to have you guys break into little groups, whether you're on Zoom or in person, and talk about a natural resource management scenario involving a natural resource preserve in the South Pacific, some of the U.S. territories there. So, you can watch Moana movie this weekend and get in the South Pacific mindset and look at this RAD, National Park Service document, and we'll get to kind of put it into action on Monday in class. I look forward to it. Have a safe and enjoyable weekend. I'll see you soon.